First-time CEO war stories. Raising capital.
Back-to-back panels are fun, but this is an incredibly exciting panel because this is a lot of what a lot of these conferences are made up of first-time founders running around trying to meet and introduce themselves to investors. And what are those war stories of actually first-time founders raising capital? And we have an entire panel here that we're going to dig into that. Before we do that, I do want to highlight, we have Jordan Pollack here from Israel, and whatever is going on in Israel, of which we all know, I want to say thank you very much for making the effort to come out here today. We're all with you in support in Israel. Thank you so much for coming out here, and we're going to start by introductions all the way down the list. And please, sitting next to me here from Sweden, please introduce yourself, your name, your company, and a little bit about what you're doing, and we'll go down the list.
Great, thank you. So my name is Laura Perkins. I'm a biomedical scientist by training, and I'm working on developing an artificial heart, the real heart. So unique about the real heart is it's the only one that pumps like a human heart, and then we're working on patient-friendly controllers and accessories. Thank you.
Bryce Klontz, most recently CEO of New View Surgical. It was an early-stage company developing visualization devices for minimally invasive surgery. Spent 15 years at Covidian, now Medtronic before that, running various businesses in the US, Europe, and Asia, and 2 other startups along the way. I think my war story stems from raising capital at New View Surgical and raising $25 million, but $23 million of that through angel groups. So if you think of the check size and the process of that, 23 million worth. So a lot of stories, a lot of war stories and lessons learned from that experience.
Jordan Pollack, CEO of VeinWay. Thank you, Giovanni. Love the support. I'm CEO of a company called VeinWay. We're located in Israel, and we are dealing with chronic venous disease. And actually, I'll talk about this a little bit throughout the panel, but veins are often called the forgotten vessels because everyone spent 40 years targeting arterial interventions. So we have a device that's designed specifically for crossing and opening chronic occlusions in veins. We're the first ones to do this, so keep an eye out for us because you're going to be seeing some big news.
I'm Aashiish Agnihotri. I'm the founder and CEO of xDot Medical. We are an early stage company getting ready for our first in man study in Q1 of next year. We have raised about $4 million. Before this, I spent 15 years with Medtronic, and I'm an engineer by training, but I moved to marketing and strategy roles at Medtronic. Did a lot of assessment of new technologies and startups there, and I always thought that they are doing the fun stuff, we are just looking at them. So I left Medtronic and founded xDot about 2.5 years ago.
Hi, Joe Rafferty. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of VESTECK. We're Westchester, Pennsylvania based, another office in Carlsbad. We're in the aortic repair space. We've raised to date almost $10 million. We're raising a Series B $16 million round, and love to talk to all the investors here about the great things happening at VESTECK.
My name is Victor. I am the CEO and co-founder of Aliform. We are a US-Dutch-based medical device company focusing on minimally invasive skin surgery. So I'm also a biomedical scientist, and about 3 years ago I left a cushy job in teaching in academia. Ended up having to build a lab from Amazon components. But this June we raised our VC funding for the seed round, so we're in a happy place, but it was not always like that.
So I want to kick off an open-ended question and have each of the panelists answer it, which I think we can start pulling from after we get through the panel. But the whole idea of this is first-time founders and war stories of raising capital, which means there's a lot of the people in this room right now who are first-time founders and are currently raising or starting a raise, or hopefully successfully have raised, this year especially. And there was a point in time where you've never raised before. You had no clue of what that even meant. You were an engineer, you were a physician, you were in commercialization, and you made the transition over to being a founder or first-time CEO. But there was that first time, and you had nowhere to start, or had no idea where to start. So I want to hear how each of you actually started raising money from that inception moment of when you had to start raising money, and some of those learning lessons. And if you can toss in a actual learning lesson of a war story, it would be hyper beneficial for the entire room. So if you don't mind, let's actually start with you, Victor.
Well, thank you very much. At least I can kick it off by saying that when I left academia, I had no connections to investment, anything whatsoever, and was completely faced with just the reality of quite a tormented experience of having to face this cold approaches and everything. And in our case, we actually broke through that bottleneck with a very unplanned and I'd say kind of a lucky way, is actually raised through non-profit activities of mine where I met people coincidentally that end up having money, but everything else was at that time when raising first angel funding didn't really work. There was definitely a lot of cringy mistakes we made, but stuff actually worked was where I ended up raising through charity connections I had. I don't know, what about you guys? Aashiish, what about, you have an interesting experience with the clinician background of yours, right?
Yeah, so my background was in engineering. My background was in engineering and marketing. I had a big network of physicians, and my plan was, I did not have a network with investors, but my plan was that I will raise money from physicians, and they are high net worth individuals, and that was at least my hypothesis. And it took me a little bit longer than I had thought. It took me a lot longer than I had initially thought that it will take me to raise that money. They did come, they did invest, a lot of physicians invested in my company early on. But one of my lessons was that first-time founders will make mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes, and it's totally okay with making those mistakes. That's how you will learn and build that network. I reached out to a lot of investors very early on, when we were very early in our experience, and they flat out told us that you're a little bit too early, and I did not mind that. I think telling that story, telling my story of what we were trying to do, helped us refine that story. I learned what all the objections I'll get. So by now, when we are ready for that, I have heard a lot of feedback before. I've addressed that, and when I talk to investors now, they can see all the progress that we have made. And that I feel like is a very powerful thing, that from where I was a year ago, a year and a half ago, to where we are now, that's a lot of progress, and they can see that.
Joe?
I was fortunate in that I worked early in startups as the commercialization arm or operations arm with startups, and we would go out and raise money, and we call it the dog and pony show. You'd have a CEO and a COO and a commercialization person, and you're part of the team. And then it changes when you're the CEO, because you are the team. Especially, we raised 10 million, and I laugh because I've started to use the word we all the time now, because I find the I is pretty off-putting. But we raised $10 million during COVID, and of course you don't want to put folks on planes and visiting investors during COVID. So that whole process was quite engaging, and it is different when it's you out messaging and taking the coaching versus the team. So quite a bit different.
Jordan?
Well, I'd say there's a lot here that's already been mentioned, so it's hard for me to follow all of that up, because it is a network problem. I'm very fortunate to be in Israel, which is one of the smallest communities I think that there is. You can pick up the phone and call someone who will get you to somebody else. And even if that person doesn't want to invest in you, they'll actually connect you. So I think the biggest learning, one of the biggest challenges that I really felt fundraising was getting FaceTime with people. I know that even a few people in this room have helped me out sometimes with emails and things like that, but emails don't do it. The investors get 10,000 emails a week of people pitching, and even if they are warm introductions, it's still very difficult to get through to them. And so one of the biggest things is, as much as I start to feel like I'm living on a plane, it has been the difference maker to the fundraising, is to actually get out there, meet people face to face, talk to them. MedTech Innovator has been an exceptional networking piece that's allowed me to refine the pitch. Ken Nelson was just up here talking about that, and allowing us to refine our elevator pitch and do those things, being a part of accelerators. I'm also part of an incubator in Israel, which has been also a big help in connections. And I think as a first-time CEO, one of the things is I did give up equity in the company to join the incubator, but I didn't have the capital to start my own company. So I really did need that network. So my learning and my advice would be also, if you get help, don't worry as much about who gets what. What's most important is funding the company and getting your vision out into the world.
And before we go to Bryce real quick, I just want to follow up with one thing that Renee Ryan, the former CEO of Kala Health, said, this one-liner. And it said, no company has ever died from dilution, but they have died from no capital.
Exactly.
Bryce.
Very true, yeah. Similar to the other panelists, made a lot of mistakes early on in the process. I had come from a venture-backed startup and spent 15 years in the corporate world, so knew private equity and VC connections to a network and started there. Learned fairly quickly, though not quickly enough, that we were too early stage. All the lessons you learned about targeting incorrectly, but also not having the early stage angel network available to me. So much like the other panelists, it was 18 months to raise the first $1 million. After that, a year later, $2.5 million, a year later, $9 million on that, so it started to roll, but it took a long, long time to raise that first $1 million and get over the hump, and it was all about networking. Had to really change who I was networking with, who I knew, so started going to angel conferences, Angel Capital Association, made a random connection there that led me to a key angel group that started the process rolling. And then after that, it was just persistence and networking and attending conferences and doing pitches daily for a year just to build that network to understand who is who and get that process rolling.
You just need that first catalyst, right? And then it all kind of starts to go from there.
You need the first one, and I guess the lesson is you don't know where that's going to come from. So attending every conference, talking to everybody, taking every meeting, even if it doesn't seem of value, you learn something or you make a connection. And a lot of my very early fundraising, getting over that initial $1 million hump, was through random connections of people that I had no connection to in the first 6 months of trying to raise capital. And it was just trying to take all those meetings and networking and persisting. A lot of bad meetings, but a lot of good ones that led ultimately to that those funds being raised.
Ina?
So I heard yesterday at the CEO Forum many CEOs saying that the EU funding, the grant funding, is quite difficult to get. So I thought I'd share my experiences on that. So coming from a scientist background, got a PhD, I'm quite used to writing really lengthy documents. Also really used to getting a lot of no's from peer reviews, when you're writing papers and getting criticized a lot. So quite used to taking that feedback. And I think that is good, having, being prepared for the toughness of the EU funding, because you're going to have to write hundreds of pages of the application and you're going to get no's. But don't give up, because I think I applied about 5 times, and every time you apply you get feedback, and it doesn't reduce your success rate, it increases your success chance. So I would say to definitely continue to do that. And if anybody wants to talk more to me about EU funding, I'd be happy to share that afterwards. But then also it can be something that maybe you didn't think of initially. So I was really, really focused on describing maybe the product and all the product benefits compared to what's out there. But then when I finally got it, I started as a CSO for this company, but then 2 years ago took over as the CEO. When I finally got it, the feedback from the jury was it was a change in management. So now they thought, saw this difference and were building up the team differently. So that's one aspect. Another thing that probably sets me apart here is that I run a public company. So we're listed on NASDAQ in Sweden. And I think that this has helped. I've seen many companies go under. I've been worked in heart pumps for the last decades and see many, many companies in this industry go under. So, during the times of COVID, it's maybe been difficult to raise funds. It's been a help to be on the stock market. Also, it helps us talk to potential users, because anybody could be an investor. So really to try to get that patient message crisp of what is the benefit of our product.
Victor? Aashiish.
Yeah, I just want to add to something that the last two people said, that you need to pursue all the different sources of funding. Initially I had my mind that this is my chart or this is my fundraising plan. I'll raise this from angel investors and then I'll go to VCs. And I looked into the VCs who invest into that type of company and that type of amount. But that's not how in reality it works. And we also submitted for SBIR grants. We ended up not getting, but that effort was very helpful. We got very good at literature. We know the competition inside out. And I think a lot of those things may not work out, but you have to pursue all the different sources of funding that you can get. So.
Yeah, and adding to different sources of funding, also exploring innovation debt. So we went to the local organizations in Sweden that support Swedish companies from the government, and we tried to say, well, if you don't have grants, do you have other? Can you give us some debt? And this means that we have really, really good rates, and we don't have to pay it back until we get some revenue. And we also started a subsidiary in Australia, because Australia it has a really great history in developing heart pumps. So the competence was there, and then they have 45% cash back on any investment that you do in R&D. So that also helped.
I should not have moved out from Australia then, because we went from Australia to Germany. Then I realized it's bloody hard to raise in Germany, so went to US and then ended up having a VC from the Netherlands who invested in the US company with a Dutch subsidiary. Can I ask you a question? The statement, it takes money to raise money. What would you think? How correct is that? And when you don't have much yet and you're raising on a budget, you cannot travel to every conference and take every meeting because you're half prototyping, half trying to survive. What's your playbook in this situation? I mean, it's easy now for us to say and remember, but it's quite fresh for me. But what do you think? I don't know.
I'll take that one. So I'm very fortunate to have an incredible co-founder and CTO. So I just gave him all of the engineering work and said, here you go. I trust you to do all of this, and I'm going to go out and fundraise. And of course, I'm available. I lead the team, and I'm still there. But I think that comes down to, I was watching another panel that Giovanni hosted as well in Dublin, and one of the things came down to having a good management team. And even when you're early, I think even just a good co-founder, somebody who can take on that role. I've seen startups where the CEO also tried to be the CTO or VP of R&D. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
And is it because of the time split, the overall kind of distraction that you think that's the case?
Yes, because you can't be deep into R&D in the lab and doing studies, and then at the same time need to be at a conference for a week meeting investors. You just can't.
Yeah, I'll share my experience here. For us, when I started the company, it was just me. And so I had to do everything. I'm trying to also do some, through contractors, get some R&D going, and then I'm also trying to raise money. I didn't have enough money or any money to go to travel, but I did participate into a lot of local networking events. So it is very important to be plugged into your local, startup scene. You'll learn so many things. Just like now we are learning from each other's experiences, there is a lot of wisdom in your local startup scene as well. The state fund, every local government or state will have some or other form of promotional thing, and we were able to leverage that through that network and through what are the things that they are looking for, and how to leverage that. And early on when you're starting, getting that grant for $35,000 or $70,000 is very meaningful. I mean, I was celebrating like that. We have just gotten $1 million or something like that, right? So I think it is, you don't always have to travel. You can network. And I started my company in the COVID times, so there were a lot of meetings happening on Zoom. So we were still able to do a lot of networking on Zoom as well.
Yeah, same experience. Absolutely no cash when we started. In fact, I inherited $250,000 in debt. So I got 2 patents and $250,000 in debt and decided to go for it. Didn't take a salary for 2 years. My wife supported that somehow, and built it and did it, fortunately being in Boston. that helped, right? Because that local network is very strong there. And just working the New York, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. corridor on Amtrak and staying with friends and trying to make it work. So it's just that persistence, and often you don't start with any capital. So I guess I don't agree that having money, or money is required to raise money. Most of us have the experience in the early stage that that's absolutely not the case, and you persist anyway and you make it happen.
Well, you don't actually have much choice, right? When you're just starting out, either you have to make it work, right? Yeah.
And maybe Victor can share his war story about not having money to raise money. He's got a great story to tell.
I mean, I'll try to give a condensed version of that this time around, but imagine having to take a flight in Germany, that just from Germany to US, because we got scouted by an investor there, and that felt like, excuse me, a lifeline, lifeblood lifeline. Well, there was a definite chance worth taking, and I don't know, like at some point in time, you have to realize that you've tapped out your opportunity pool where you are, and I'd love to hear what you think as when do you actually gauge that, like when do you know that you've actually dried up of opportunities, it's time for you to take some risks to move. But in our case, it meant going to Dallas in Texas, where we got scouted actually by an accelerator with another fund. So to fund that, sorry, my co-founder wife was there, but we used our honeymoon gift money for that, and it paid off. So it worked at the end, but it was a big faith thing, I guess, and having to build a lab from Amazon components on like budget 3D printers to be able to get some prototyping value and traction, and having your clinician to pay up front for the preclinical studies so you can have some leverage with investors. We did all that. I wouldn't recommend doing it again. I think I wouldn't have done it either if I knew what it costed, but sometimes you just have to have to survive. But yeah, can I extend on that question? A lot of the times you see like people get rooted in a network that they have. It could be often at a university or a particular thing they know. How do you know when it's time to bridge to new horizons, to take that leap and go into like a new, completely new culture sometimes often? Like how would you know, did you have to do this? Would you have found like enough from where you were? Or I'd love to hear, I don't know, you guys.
Bridge your network as soon as possible. I think those experiences have all been had here, that if you stick to your known network, you run out of opportunities pretty quickly, and you got to expand. So it's just that getting out there, opening your network, opening up your horizons to new opportunities. You never know early stage where the funding is going to come from. So get out there and get those experiences as soon as you can, and just be open to it.
One of the, Israel's is a great country for funding. But I will openly complain about the Israeli VCs, and that they are now obsessed with digital health. And as a company that is more of a pure traditional medical device company, I just get rejected left and right by them. In fact, you can go on their website and see that they made medical device investments, including the ones that invested in companies like PVT and some of the really big ones. And then they say, no, we stopped doing that now. And so I stopped chasing Israeli VCs very early. I realized that I had to get out. I went to the US. I was able to build some network there, also in Europe, and it's the FaceTime. And COVID, yes, there were some things. Our initial funding actually came from a grant from the Israel Innovation Authority and the incubator, which I was very fortunate to get because that was local. But that's capped. That's capped at about $800,000, and that's it. So if you need more than that, you gotta start getting out and getting on a plane. Really, that's what you gotta do.
So for me, being public in Sweden, I've raised 20 million euros in Sweden.
That's impressive.
Because that's just the way that the stock market works there, and how you have to raise that way. But actually internationally, I've worked since the start, because the heart pump field is quite niched, and so it's just spread all over the world. So one way of getting funding maybe a little bit alternatively is identifying academics who want to collaborate, because they're already paid by the university, and if they have an interest in your area, it's just about getting those IP agreements set up in the right way.
You raised from academics? Do I understand correctly?
No, so first starting to collaborate with academics.
Okay, right,
they're working for free basically because they're already paid by the university. And then if they get academic grants, which they're usually quite good at getting, then that's indirectly funding your business. So we set up a lot of those types of collaborations early on to get lots of work done with a small budget. And I guess...
That's very interesting.
But the reason I'm here now is because we got the EIC accelerator. So now I'm being pushed to go out and race outside of Sweden because the EIC nominated us for 15 million euro investment, but they want to see us bring in new investors and ideally, from outside of Sweden.
And one thing I'll add here is that, you have to expand that network, but you have to also, if you reached out to somebody and asked for, investment and you got a no, I don't mind the no as long as I get a reason. Because if you know the reason, you can address that, or at least you know that why they are not investing. A lot of people who said no to me in the beginning, they end up becoming investors later on. So getting that feedback was incredibly helpful. I always ask for some feedback, whatever feedback I can get, and especially the early stage investors, a lot of time they will tell us very candidly that why they are not investing, and it is sometimes that, right now it's only you. Once you have a team, then we'll invest. So once we got a team behind us, we reached out to those investors again and we were able to get a check from them. So to me, it is not necessarily a door is shut. It's like, what is the big lesson for me was that, okay, ask why not no, why is the answer no? And then can we address that, right? And sometimes it's the timing, sometimes it's something else. But a lot of those times, we were able to address that, or convert that no into yes, sometimes in 3 months, sometimes in 6 months, sometimes a little bit longer. But, at least that's what my experience has been.
I've also seen them keep kicking the can down the road, though. They say, oh, we want to see clinical data. And then I come with a few patients. No, we need to see more clinical data. Then I come with more patients. No, still more. No, we want to see 10 million in revenue now.
So I want to... soft no. I want to go to another high-level topic that I've talked to all of you about in some capacity. This transition of selling your story and pitching for angels and family offices and then making that transition into pitching to VCs and that institutional capital, which act differently. And the frustrations, the ahas, and the learning moments, because some of you have had to stick to going to that institutional after the angels and family, and that's your next path because you are raising larger sums. Others have had to change their strategy and pull back, and I'm just going to raise the rest of it from either grants or continue on with angels after failing miserably with VCs. So I want to go and just hear your thoughts on what is it like to cross that chasm or have to pull back on raising from angels and families and then go try with the institutionals.
I think it's become less of a chasm. I think from my experience, the angel groups have become a lot more sophisticated and they've become a lot more professional. They've attracted members who have some of that experience. So the pitch process, the screening process, the pitch process, the diligence process has gotten a lot more sophisticated. So when making that transition, certain VCs who have expertise are going to ask better questions perhaps and more in-depth questions that you're prepared for. But overall, I found that that bridge to be a lot easier in that all the angel work that was done led well into the VC pitches that we ended up making. That was my experience, at least.
I'll add a couple of things here. So I raised money from some angel networks, but also some high network individuals and also some family offices. And although I was telling the same story, but the questions I was getting, from the audience or the investors were different. So I think you're absolutely right. The angel investors, they are beginning to do diligence a little bit more like VCs now. But a lot of other people, family offices, they very quickly assess that, okay, you understand your market, you understand your technology, and they went into a different direction in their diligence. What they were looking for in terms of credibility or whatever their evaluation criteria were, that was different. Versus for VCs and the angel groups the larger angel groups that I talked to, they were doing an assessment more on the market and the technology and feasibility. So I thought that the diligence process, or at least the criterias, were different in those groups. individuals and family offices tend to go more on your credibility than market and some of the other things, versus VCs and bigger angel groups who are more sophisticated, they would still want to understand the market and that you understand and the technology and those risks.
Yeah, there was a conversation yesterday that I thought was quite brilliant, talking about the East Coast versus the West Coast versus Europe. And sometimes that gets kind of painted with a broad brush where you're classifying everybody as thinking the same way. And one thing that I've used, whether it's VCs, family offices, high net worth individuals, is understanding what their priorities are, so that when we go through the deck, and I'll guarantee you each of us here on the podium has got maybe 1,000 versions of the decks we built, because it's always getting brushed. But frankly, understanding what's important to the buyer, to the investor, and allowing them to do that data dump before we even do the presentation allows us to modify and understand what their hot points are. And to this day, you know, I just changed my presentation for Friday already, so based on some of the coaching we got yesterday. So,
you know, it's fascinating to hear your perspectives. In our case, it's actually kind of opposite. It was an epic fail every time we tried to do an angel network. Like, you know, at one time, one gentleman literally was smoking this pipe full of tobacco, and he just blew the smoke in my face as I was trying to pitch. At that point, I realized something has to change. But in VCs, actually, we found it much easier to deal with VCs. Actually, we spoke to 2 VCs in total in the race from the second one that we spoke with. But every time, this was like a proper conversation. Like, we didn't aim for VCs. We kept getting beat up often by like the angel or like seed funds, but a VC, for some reason, they just clicked. Could have just been luck, or maybe we did something right, probably both. But it's very interesting. Like, you know, you mentioned the interpersonal factor, right? The ability to portray the vision in the case of family offices, which I don't have experience with dealing. You know, that ethics factor as well. I mean, do you see such a thing as too early to speak to a VC, really, or more like just keep all the options open? Like, what do you say?
You know, my answer is that I think I started talking to VCs from the beginning, and maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I won't do that next time, but I don't think, at least for the first time CEO of this time, it was a mistake. It helped me refine my pitch and understand a lot of those things, where they are coming from and what their objections are going to be. So fundraising is very much like a sales process, right? You are selling something, and you have to learn to do objection handling. And you can only do that if you know the objections. So, I mean, for me, I started talking to VCs way early. I may not do it again, but I don't think it was, you know, all that bad this time.
I think one of the, going back to the original point too, the difference between angels and VCs is sometimes angels are often investing their own money, and VCs are investing someone else's money, which makes their approach different.
So would you say they could be more dispassionate, but more approachable from like the numbers side here? Because I find kind of the same thing. Like, the personal factor is important, but the numbers speak louder sometimes in that, you know, managers.
Well, think about it. Like an angel, if they're, and then most angel groups are investing their own money. So not all, but most. So what they're trying to make sure that you're going to protect their money. So they're going to really they might ask you more questions about what your plan is in the future. I had angel groups ask me questions about my sales plan, which is still like 3 to 4 years out in the future, where VCs that never came up, because it's that approach. It's like when you're spending someone else's money, maybe you think about it differently than spending your own money.
That's interesting.
Do you have something? Wanted to throw a softball because I think this is a huge part of raising capital. And we can talk about the black and white objective questions like the transition from angel and family into institutional, but the psychology of entrepreneurship and taking 1,000 no's and how to lead a company while going out there and fundraising. When you're leading your companies and growing in these early stages and growing into maybe mid stages, but still raising capital on a consistent basis, how do you make it through those dark times? I mean, the CEO is the loneliest position. We've talked about that. It's a very thematic theme of entrepreneurship, at least in this conference so far. The psychology of entrepreneurship while raising capital, how do you manage yourself and how do you manage your company?
For me, it's the patient stories. So I am connected with many heart transplant recipients and heart pump patients, and talking to them, that just gives me the energy, because they really appreciate what I do, and that, for me, that's what matters.
Yeah, understanding your why, completely critical. Why am I here? Why do I want to do this? A support network helps. A spouse that's supportive helps. Talking to other CEOs about their experiences helps, and having that network, and being vulnerable enough to reach out to that network and say, this is hard. What have you done about this? How have you worked through it? Being vulnerable in that helped me a lot. Just to have those honest conversations about the experience just centers you in, yes, this is really hard. This is going to get harder. But that if you're doing it for the right reasons and you're going to help patients and everything that's important about this, just gives you that day-to-day and week-to-week energy to continue to persist through the difficult times, for sure.
I just go home and cry myself to sleep every night. Or maybe turn to alcohol. No, in all seriousness, it's really important that also we as CEOs maintain our routines, still make it to the gym. I meditate every single morning, and when I don't, I feel off. I've noticed that is a trend amongst CEOs, is to be incredible meditators. Actually, if you look at like Silicon Valley, I think they've taken it way too far, perhaps, but yes. There are certain things, maintaining our mental health support from friends and family is really important. And also, take vacation. You have to. The company's not going to die if you take a week off. You really do. Actually, a great story, if I may. I went to the Galapagos Islands with my family. We were on a boat. It was really awesome. And I didn't have internet or any cell phone service for 4 days. So I told my team, I said, you can't contact me even if you want to. So you're on your own. And then I ended up raising $500,000 from one of the couples on the boat.
Brilliant.
That's an awesome story. That's an awesome story. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
You know, I think these guys captured all those things. Ask for help. Like, you know, it is a lonely job, but you don't need to make it lonely. Ask for help. Talk to people. Talk to your, spouse, your partner. Those things are important. And take vacations. Take break. It's not, it's 100% 24-hour job. You cannot stop thinking about those things, but you need to learn to stop your brain sometimes. You need ways to decompress and de-stress. Otherwise, it will consume you. So I think all those are good points here.
Yeah, I'm obviously the senior citizen on this panel, and been married for 43 years, and I'm a salesman, have been forever, and so having been married for 43 years, you get used to no, but what do you know? Come back and bring us a different pitch deck, no you get comfortable with, and we have a euphemism in our company, we call it waves on the beach. If we just keep coming, people come to the beach, they enjoy the waves. It's a consistency of performance, of behavior. You just got to keep coming, and the energy's got to keep coming, because the no's are going to come. And as I think everybody has said, the no means just no for now, and now is only now. Things change minutes later, and so appreciating that the waves keep coming.
Would you like another anecdote?
Please. Another war story.
Yeah. Still from Dallas, just before we raised the first angel funding, which is like $2,000 on all your bank accounts combined, and quickly running out. I was living in a ghetto Airbnb, and one night there was like a shooting outside, right? I could hear the pop, pop, I'm like, I called up my wife, I'm like, this is a bit much, I'd like to, So I packed up my bags and went to sleep in an accelerator building in downtown, which I did, and I took a shower in the gym, And I always used to go to the steam room there, and that's a fantastic way to de-stress no matter what. If you just keep cranking up the temperature, one pain lessens another eventually, and you just kind of refresh yourself, right? Then I'm sitting in the steam room, and then there's two guys that I meet, and they're very cheery fellas. Like, they just keep on going and going, and they realize they're running guns. These guys run an arms business, and they're full on serious. I asked me if I have any connections. I was born in Russia, and I was left when I was 15. But they asked me, do you know any people with the AK-47s? I'm like, I do not. And I kind of came back to the office, and I just took a coffee and checked my bank account. And I saw it's not too bad, you're in the right business, you have a patients you want to help, And it's one of those things when just, if you remind yourself, as you said, that you are in the right game, and eventually it is worth the sacrifice. You don't need a guarantee that it will work, but the pursuit itself sometimes is, worth it. When there's a contrast of quite different things around. Thank you.
And with the time left, we have enough time, but that was a great story, by the way. And if any of you have an actual war story that yielded an aha moment that you feel comfortable sharing for the audience on entrepreneurship, raising capital, and that learning lesson, that was a mistake, and I learned a pretty hard lesson. If anyone has that story, please jump in.
Well, we had one. We talked earlier about the difference between family money and venture money and angel money. The long story short, as we discussed, keep the funnel full. And I know right now it's really tough to have multiple term sheets, but we got leveraged. We went down the road, and as an opportunity for a lead investor was moving through the funnel and they were doing due diligence, I realized that this was a scripted play that they had well orchestrated. The good news was we had another term sheet and that we were able to leverage and not get leveraged. And I know it's hard now because just getting the first term sheet and leading the round is a challenge, but that was one of those ahas. We almost got to the point where we were out of money. There was the cliche that some money is better than others. This was bad money, bad people, and it was a huge aha that you let your guard down a minute, and because you get a little bit desperate and just say, sometimes you got to walk away, and so we did, and we didn't get leveraged.
Thank you for that.
My story is not a horror story, but there is an aha moment and there's a lesson here. As a first-time CEO, and I think a lot of people will probably make this mistake, you don't really know how to negotiate, especially when you are getting desperate and when you really want some money to, you're running on fumes. We were raising some amount recently or last year, and then the investor came back with some terms, and I was about to, take that. I'm like, okay, this is great. And then I talked to my board, and the board people are very seasoned. They gave me advice that you can give those terms, but ask the investor to double the amount. And I asked that. It took us a little bit longer. It added a week or two of negotiations, but we got a lot more money that way. And that suddenly, once you get, somebody was saying, once the money starts coming in, other people start, adding there too. So I think it's good to ask for help, especially with negotiations. We do not know how to, especially first-time CEOs, if you do not have experience of doing that, it is good to ask for advice.
Just a quick story, and the lesson being, pick the right partner and bring in the right money from the right folks. So while I raised all this money through angels, actually in our Series B, it was VC-led. And we got most of the way through the round, 90% filled with that VC leading the round. But it became evident to myself and the board that the VC may not be the best partner. But we were back for it. We had $30,000 in the bank. FDA clearance and $30,000 in the bank, and had to make a choice. And I ended up making the call without the board's knowledge to tell the VC to go away. So it took the lead and took half the round, a $7 million round, this is a $4 million lead, and told them I didn't think they were going to be a good partner and to go away. And then I called my board and said, I told the lead to go away. And there's $30,000 in the bank. But the lesson was that the board supported the decision, and that round turned out to be not only a $7 million round, but a $9 million round, because the angels were so surprised that a CEO supported their interests and didn't take on a VC that was going to take their rights and all their privileges in the terms, that ended up being a much larger round than I expected from the angels, and that again perpetuated how much money was ultimately raised through the angel groups. But that was just a highly stressed moment, but the right decision for the right reasons. And if you do the right thing for the right reasons and take the right money, good things can happen. And it's a rule to try to stand by if you can.
Amazing point to end on. I want to say thank you to all the panelists here, the first-time CEOs and their war stories of raising capital. I hope the whole audience learned something new today. Thank you very much for your time. Let's give them a round of applause.